You know, they say a man's home is his castle. But a castle is just a pile of stones if the halls are empty. It's a cold, drafty place where the only sound is the echo of your own footsteps. I spent a lifetime building those walls, brick by brick, for a kingdom I thought would one day be filled with the laughter of my children and their children. I worked double shifts, skipped vacations, and invested every dime I had into the future. A future where I'd be surrounded by the warmth of a family I'd given everything for. But a funny thing happens when you give everything. You can be left with nothing. Nothing but the silence. And in that silence, you can hear the truth. It was a truth I wasn't ready for, a truth that would shake the very foundations of my being, leading me down a path I never imagined. If you find yourself in this story, if you see a piece of your own heart in these words, then don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you believe that kindness and forgiveness can heal even the deepest wounds, then show us by hitting that like button and joining this community of souls who believe in second chances. Because sometimes, the stories we need to hear the most are the ones we never knew we were looking for. This isn't a story about a man who got mad. It's a story about a man who felt so invisible, he had to remind himself he was still there. It's a story that started with a cake. And a blank calendar. Let's go back a bit. Back to the beginning. See, I wasn't always this old man sitting in a quiet house. There was a time when the noise of life was deafening. A time of little league games and ballet recitals, of school plays and science fairs. I was a mechanic. I could fix anything with an engine, but the real masterpiece I was trying to build was my family. My wife, Sarah, and our 3 children, Michael, the eldest, who was all ambition and drive, Emily, the middle child, who had a heart as big as the moon and a fiery spirit, and little Thomas, the baby, who followed me around the garage like a shadow, handing me wrenches and asking a million questions. I lived for those kids. I was a father, and for me, that wasn't just a title. It was a sacred duty. A promise. I promised to protect them, to guide them, to give them a life better than my own. My own father was a hard man, a silent man, who showed his love through a roof over our heads and food on the table, but never through a hug or a kind word. I vowed to be different. I vowed to be there. For every scraped knee, there was a bandage and a hug. For every heartbreak, there was a shoulder to cry on and a wise word. For every victory, there was a proud smile and I knew you could do it. I remember the day Michael got into his first choice college. He had worked so hard, and the look on his face when he opened that letter. I would have traded my own soul to see that joy for the rest of my life. We celebrated at our favorite diner, the one with the red leather booths and the jukebox that only played oldies. He was already looking forward, talking about big city life, a corner office, a future so bright it was blinding. I sat there, feeling a knot of pride and a twinge of loss in my throat. The little boy who used to hold my hand was about to walk away, and I had to let him. Emily was the peacemaker. When Michael and Thomas would argue, she was the one who'd step in, her voice calm and steady, finding a compromise that made everyone feel heard. She was the one who came with me to the grocery store on Saturday mornings, pushing the cart and picking out the best apples. She'd chatter about her friends, her dreams, her love of art. She saw the world as a canvas, something beautiful to be painted and shaped. She wanted to be a teacher, to inspire young minds. I used to joke that she got her patience from her mother and her stubbornness from me. She'd just laugh and say, "And I got the best of both, Dad." And Thomas. Little Tommy. He was the one who never grew up in my mind. He was the one who, at 16, still came to me for advice about girls, his face red with embarrassment. He was the one who loved working with his hands, just like me. I taught him how to change a tire, how to fix a leaky faucet, how to rebuild a carburetor. We spent hours in the garage, a sacred space of grease, metal, and father-son conversations. The smell of gasoline and the sound of classic rock on the radio was the soundtrack of his childhood. He was the one I could be a boy with again. Those were the golden years. The years I thought would never end. The calendar was full. Birthdays, anniversaries, holidays. We were a unit, a tight-knit clan against the world. I felt like the richest man alive, not with money, but with purpose. My purpose was them. My goal was to be the best father I could be. Then, slowly, insidiously, the noise began to fade. Michael got his degree, and then his MBA, and then a high-powered job in the city. The phone calls went from daily to weekly, then weekly to bi-weekly. The visits went from every weekend to once a month. His world was fast-paced and full of important people. It was a world I didn't fit into. Emily fell in love with a wonderful man named David. He was a good man, a kind man, and I was happy for her. They built their own life, their own nest, and the space I occupied in her world shrunk. She was a mother now, to a beautiful little girl named Lily. I was a grandfather, a role I was blessed to have. But even that had its limits. They were busy with their own lives, their own social circles. The natural progression of things, I told myself. Thomas tried a few different things. He went to a technical school, got a certification, but he was never quite able to find his footing. He moved around, went where the work was. He wasn't as good with the phone as his sister. He was more of a "I'll see you when I see you" kind of guy. Sarah, my wife, was the anchor. She tried to keep the family together, organizing dinners, sending out emails, trying to coax them back for holidays. We were a team. We'd sit on the porch in the evenings and talk about the kids. I'd say, "They're just finding their own way, they'll come back." She'd look at me with those knowing eyes, a mix of love and sadness, and say, "I hope so, Gregory. I hope so." But time, as it always does, began to take its toll. Sarah got sick. It was a quiet, stealthy illness that started as a persistent cough and a lack of energy. The doctors said it was a lung condition. It was a long, slow goodbye. For months, I was her sole caretaker. I watched the woman I loved, the woman who was the very center of my world, fade away. And where were our children during this? Michael was busy with a merger. Emily had a sick child of her own and couldn't travel. Thomas was on a job assignment in another state and couldn't get away. There were phone calls, of course. Short, hurried conversations. "How is she? Tell her we love her." They'd send flowers to the hospital, beautiful arrangements that would wilt in a few days. But they didn't come. I never blamed them. I made excuses for them. They were busy. They had their own lives. They were dealing with their own pressures. I was the father. It was my job to carry this burden. And I did. I held Sarah's hand, I read to her from her favorite books, I told her jokes to make her smile, even when it hurt. I was her rock, her nurse, her husband. I poured every ounce of my being into her final days. The day she passed was a gray, rain-soaked Tuesday. The sun never came out, as if the world itself was mourning. I sat by her bedside, her hand cold in mine, the silence of the room heavier than any sound I'd ever known. The beeping of the machine stopped, and there was just quiet. It was the loneliest moment of my entire life. After the funeral, a blur of faces and condolences, the silence in the house became my new companion. Sarah's laughter was gone. The smell of her perfume was a fading ghost in the closet. The kitchen, where she used to bake, was quiet. I remember looking at her favorite coffee mug in the cupboard and just breaking down. It was an ordinary cup, chipped on the rim, but it was hers. It was a part of her. The kids came for the funeral. They flew in, stayed for a few days, and then they were gone again, back to their lives. The house, once a sanctuary of laughter, became an echoing mausoleum of memories. I was alone. For a while, I didn't know what to do with myself. I'd wake up in the morning and just stare at the ceiling. The house was paid for. I had a modest pension from the garage. I had a healthy savings account, a nest egg I'd been adding to for years, meant for things like college funds, weddings, and helping the kids with down payments on houses. It was a fund for the family. For my family. The only problem was, my family had become strangers. I was approaching my 60th birthday. It was supposed to be a milestone. For months, I'd been planning a grand family vacation. I'd saved up $15,000 for it, a trip for all of us to the mountains, a beautiful cabin by a lake. I'd imagined all of us together again. I saw a picture in my mind, Michael and his wife, Emily and David and little Lily, Thomas and a new girl he was seeing. We'd rent a boat, have bonfires, roast marshmallows, and tell stories under the stars. It was my last-ditch effort to rebuild the kingdom, to create one more perfect memory. About 2 months before my birthday, I called the kids individually. I was so excited. I asked them all to block out the first week of September for a surprise. They were non-committal. Michael said he'd have to check his schedule. Emily said she'd see what she could do with David's work. Thomas said he'd try, but his job was unpredictable. I felt a pang of disappointment, but I held on to hope. They were busy, but they'd come. They had to come. A month out, I booked the cabin. A week out, I went to the store and bought everything. I bought board games for the rainy evenings, a new fishing rod for Lily, and ingredients for Sarah's famous chili recipe, which I'd learned how to make. I cleaned the house from top to bottom. I wanted everything to be perfect. For my family. The day before my birthday, I was putting the finishing touches on a little welcome basket for them when the doorbell rang. I opened the door, my heart leaping, thinking one of them had come early. It was my neighbor, George, holding a cardboard box. He said, "Hey Greg, This was delivered to my place by mistake. Here you go. The box was a cake. A beautiful, chocolate frosted cake with happy 60th birthday, Dad, written on it. It was from a bakery I liked on the other side of town. I was overjoyed. They remembered. I thought. Maybe they're having me over, or they're coming here. My heart was soaring. I was so proud of them. I put the cake in the fridge and started preparing. I pulled out the good china, the crystal glasses we'd gotten for our 25th anniversary. I spent all afternoon getting ready, a nervous energy buzzing through me. I changed my shirt 3 times. 6 o'clock came. No one. 7 o'clock. The cake was still in the fridge, a silent, mocking promise. 8 o'clock. I started making calls. The first call was to Michael. It went to voicemail. I left a message, trying to sound cheerful. Hey, son, just wondering when you guys are coming over? The cake is waiting. The second call was to Emily. Her phone rang and rang. No answer. I left a message. Honey, it's your dad. Getting a bit anxious here. Everything okay? The third was to Thomas. The same. Voicemail. My heart was sinking. I was trying to stay positive, but a cold dread was beginning to creep in. Maybe they were all coming together and traffic was bad? At 9 o'clock, I gave up. I opened the fridge and looked at the cake, then closed the door. I couldn't bear to look at it. I went to my study, the room I used as my sanctuary. I had a small television in there. I turned it on, just for the noise. I was scrolling through channels, not really paying attention, when I stopped at a local station. It was some kind of social media show, showing clips of people's lives. And then I saw them. It was a video from Emily's social media, posted just an hour earlier. The caption read "Celebrating Dad," with a string of heart emojis. My heart did a strange lurch. Dad? I thought. But I'm here. The video showed a beautiful, lavish party. There were balloons, a live band, and a huge banner that read, "Happy Birthday, Roger." Roger was Sarah's new husband. The man my ex-wife, their mother, had married after she left me when the kids were teenagers. They were all there. Michael, laughing with a drink in his hand. Emily, holding her daughter Lily, who was wearing a party hat. And Thomas, dancing with a smile on his face. They had thrown a lavish, extravagant birthday party for their stepfather, Roger. The man who had replaced me. The man they called Dad now. On my birthday. I felt like the breath had been knocked out of me. The world tilted. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring. They hadn't forgotten. They hadn't just been busy. They had chosen. On the very night they were supposed to be with me, they were celebrating with another man. The man who had taken their mother away. The pain was sharper than any physical blow. It was a deep, soul-wrenching cut that went right to the core of my being. I had been erased. I was no longer their father. I was just a man they used to know. A ghost. A forgotten name on an old birthday card. I didn't cry. Not then. I just sat there, watching the party unfold on a screen, a silent spectator to my own irrelevance. The laughter, the joy, the love they were showering on this other man. It was all for him. It was all at the expense of me. I remembered the calls to Michael, where he sounded distant and said he was busy with a big project. I remembered Emily's short conversation about David's schedule. I remembered Thomas's vague "I'll try, Dad." It was all a lie. A simple, polite, convenient lie to get out of spending time with her father. The house, which had felt so quiet, now felt hostile. The silence was no longer just an absence of sound, it was a roar of rejection. Every picture on the wall, every trophy on the shelf, every memory I held so dear, was now a taunt. They were relics of a family that had ceased to exist for them. They had built a new life. A new family. And I was not in it. I got up from the chair, my body feeling heavy, like it was made of lead. I walked to the kitchen. I opened the fridge and took out the cake. "Happy 60th birthday, Dad," it said. The inscription was a cruel joke. I took the cake and, with a cold, deliberate slowness, I scraped the icing off and threw it in the trash. I then cut myself a slice and ate it. It tasted like ashes. Like my love, turned to dust. That was the moment the anger started to build. Not a hot, flashy anger, but a cold, steady, and determined one. It was a resolve. A decision. It was the moment I stopped being a victim and started making a plan. If my love was worthless to them, then I would find a way to give it value. If my birthday was just another day to them, then I would make it a day of significance to me. For me. By me. The next morning, the sun rose just like any other. But I was a different man. I had a purpose now. I didn't call them. I didn't lash out. I didn't send a passive-aggressive text. I just got in my car and drove to the town square. Our town square is the heart of the community. A green patch with a gazebo in the center, benches for the old folks, and a fountain that the kids toss pennies into. It's a place where life happens. Where people gather for the summer concerts, where the farmers market is held, where first dates happen. I'd always loved the square. It was where I used to bring the kids to fly kites on windy afternoons. I had a check in my pocket for $15,000. The money for the vacation. The money for the family reunion that would never happen. I walked to the town's administrative office and spoke to the mayor, a kind woman named Patricia. I told her my plan. I wanted to commission a structure. A small, beautiful, free library. A wooden box on a post, with a glass door and a roof to protect the books from the rain. I wanted it to be built by a local craftsman, in a classic, timeless style. I had it all drawn up. I had a vision. She asked me what I wanted to call it. I told her, the Second Chance Library. She smiled, a knowing, gentle look in her eyes. That's a beautiful name, Gregory. What's the story behind it? Let's just say, I replied, I'm giving my love a new address. The work began. The first few days were a blur of preparation. I started going to the town's second-hand bookstores and the library, picking out books. I wasn't just looking for any books. I was looking for books that had a story of their own. Books with worn spines and dog-eared pages. Books that had been loved by someone else. I would take them home and, in the quiet of my study, I would write a handwritten note. I put my glasses on, took out my best fountain pen, and wrote the same words on a small, beautiful piece of parchment paper. This book was bought with love that had nowhere to go. Take it. Read it. Pass it on. Don't wait to tell someone they matter. I slipped the note inside every book. It was a ritual, a cleansing. With every note I wrote, a little piece of the anger and sadness was lifted. I wasn't just building a library. I was reclaiming my story. I was taking the disappointment of my children and turning it into something beautiful. It was the ultimate act of reclamation. The first book I put in the library was a special one. It was a worn, hardcover copy of To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. It had been Sarah's favorite book. She loved the story of Atticus Finch, a man of unwavering integrity and compassion, who stood up for what was right, even when the world was against him. He was the kind of father I wanted to be. It was a book about justice, about empathy, about seeing the world from another's perspective. I chose it because that was the father I thought I was. It was a reminder of who I was, and a testament to the love that still lived inside me, even after everything. It was the book that represented the values I tried to teach my children. Respect. Integrity. Compassion. It was the perfect book to begin a new chapter, to give a second chance, not just to the books, but to the very concept of my own love. The construction took about 2 weeks. Every day, I'd go to the square and watch the craftsmen work. The smell of fresh cut wood, the sound of hammers, and the sight of that little box taking shape was the most therapeutic thing in the world. It was a tangible representation of my metamorphosis. The day it was finished, I was there at dawn. The little library was a work of art. The wood was stained a rich, warm mahogany. The glass door sparkled in the morning light. There was a little bench next to it for someone to sit and read. The brass plaque on the side read, "The Second Chance Library." I walked up to it, my hands trembling slightly. I had a stack of books with me. The first one I put in was To Kill a Mockingbird. I slid it onto the shelf, the spine facing out, and I closed the glass door. It was a small, simple act, but it felt monumental. It was the first piece of my heart I was giving away to the world. It was my declaration of independence from the pain. The first week was quiet. A few people would stop and look at it, curious. Then, a young mother and her son came. The little boy was about 7. He pointed at the books. The mother opened the door and let him choose one. He picked out a dog-eared copy of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. I was sitting on a bench nearby, pretending to read the newspaper, but I was watching them. The boy's face lit up when he opened the book. He immediately started reading it to his mother, his little voice stumbling over the words. I saw her smile. I saw her kiss his head. I felt a warmth in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. It was a small act of kindness, a single book given to a child, but in that moment, the library wasn't just a box of books. It was a bridge. It was a connection. Then, a few days later, an elderly man, a retired school teacher named Arthur, sat on the bench. He had a copy of The Old Man and the Sea. He read it for an hour, and when he finished, he just sat there, looking out at the fountain. He had a tear in his eye. He put the book back in the library and left a note of his own inside. The library became a small, special feature of the town. People would stop by to swap books. They'd leave little notes, little pieces of their own stories in the books. The notes were getting circulated, and soon, the library was featured in the town's newsletter. It was a quiet success. About a month after the library opened, my phone rang. It was Michael. I answered, my voice calm. "Hello, son." He didn't beat around the bush. "Dad, I saw something online about the town square. Is that your library? What are you doing? People are saying you spent all that money on a public bookshelf?" I heard the anger in his voice. It was the familiar tone of a man who felt he was being slighted, being denied something he was owed. He wasn't upset that I was sad or that I had been alone. He was upset about the money. "Yes, Michael," I said. "It is. It's a free library. For the community. For anyone who wants to read." There was a sharp, frustrated sigh on the other end of the line. "A library? You spent $15,000 on a library? You could have. You could have given us that money. We could have used it for Lily's school, or for a new car. It's our money. It's the family money." I felt the familiar sting. The accusation. The greed. The entitlement. It hung in the air, a thick, suffocating fog. The silence on my end was deafening, but it wasn't the silence of a broken man. It was the silence of a man who had found his voice. I replied, my voice calm and steady, not a hint of anger or resentment. "I gave you life, son. I gave you love. I gave you every single thing I had to give. And what did you give me?" He was silent. "You gave me silence, Michael. You gave me a calendar that was always blank. You gave me a birthday where you celebrated another man. You gave me a memory of a party I wasn't invited to." The words hung in the air, and I heard the sharp intake of his breath. He had been caught. He knew. "I am not punishing you," I continued, my voice unwavering. "I am showing myself that my love still has value. I am showing the world that a man can be discarded, but his heart doesn't have to break. It just has to open wider. My love just goes to strangers now. It goes to a little boy who wants to read an adventure. It goes to an old man finding comfort in a book. That is my victory, son. My heart is not broken. It is just open wider." I heard him sputter, trying to find a rebuttal, but I had already said my piece. I ended the call. That was the last time I heard from him for a long time. But that one conversation, as painful as it was the final piece of the puzzle. It was the last shackle falling from my soul. I started to live my life differently. I began to attend the town's little events. I joined a book club. I started volunteering at the local school, helping a few kids who were struggling with their reading. I didn't do it to be a hero or to find a new family. I did it because it felt good. It gave me a sense of purpose, a reason to wake up in the morning. My 61st birthday came around. I woke up and looked at the calendar. No cards. No messages. It was just another day. And for the first time, that was okay. It was a beautiful, sunny day in the fall. I made myself a simple breakfast, and I walked to the library. I had a new book to put in, a first edition of Little Women. It was a story about the strength of family, of sisters, of bonds that are tested but never broken. It was a hopeful book. I spent the day at the square. I watched the leaves change colors. I watched the kids play in the fountain. I watched people come and go to the library, their faces lit with a quiet joy of discovery. I sat on the bench with a thermos of coffee and a book of poetry. I didn't need a party. I didn't need a cake. I had peace. It wasn't the loud, boisterous happiness of a celebration. It was the calm, steady joy of inner contentment. It was the knowledge that, despite the rejection, I was still here, and I still had love to give. Later that afternoon, a young man, probably in his early 20s, came and sat on the bench next to me. He had been watching me from a distance. He was a stranger. He looked a little lost, like he was carrying the weight of his own burdens. "Sir," he said, his voice quiet. "I see you here a lot. You're the one who built that library, right?" I nodded. He asked me a question that stopped my heart for a moment. "Why are you alone?" I had to think about it. A year ago, that question would have sent me into a spiral. It would have been a trigger for a flood of tears and bitterness. But on this day, it was a simple question from a curious soul, and I had a simple answer. "Because I chose to be," I said. "Not in the way you think. It's not out of anger or sadness. It's because I learned that you can be alone and not be lonely. I built that library because I had a lot of love to give, and I needed a place to put it. I found that place. I found peace. And you know what? I'm not alone. I have all these books. I have all these stories. I have the people who read them. They might not know my name, but they know my heart. They know what I was trying to say. He looked at the library, then back at me. I think I'm afraid of that, he said. Being alone. It's not the being alone that scares you, I replied. It's the feeling of being forgotten. It's the feeling that your love doesn't matter. But it always matters. As long as you're willing to share it. We sat in silence for a long time. He eventually got up, walked to the library, and took a book. It was The Alchemist. He opened the cover and saw the note. He read it twice. He then looked at me, gave me a small, sad smile, nodded, and walked away. I watched him go. In that moment, I realized that my story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The revenge I had taken was not on my children. My revenge was on the bitterness that was trying to consume me. I had beaten it. I had filled the void with books, with kindness, with strangers who became friends for a moment. The story I had written wasn't about punishing my children. It was about saving myself. The final act of this story happened a few months later. The library had become a beloved local institution. I received a letter from a local school. A young girl, a student, was doing a project on community heroes. She had chosen the library. I was invited to a little ceremony at the school. I was incredibly nervous. I dressed in my best suit and went. At the school, the little girl stood in front of the entire assembly and read her report. She talked about how the library had changed her view of her town. She talked about the books she had found there, and how they had opened her mind. She talked about the little note inside that she had read over and over again. She held it up, a piece of my heart, for everyone to see. Don't wait to tell someone they matter, she read aloud, her voice clear and confident. The audience applauded. Her father, a man I'd seen around town, walked over and shook my hand. Thank you, he said, his eyes glistening. You taught my daughter a valuable lesson. A man can turn his pain into purpose. I walked out of that school with a light heart. I was walking home when I saw a familiar car pull up. It was Emily and David, with little Lily. They had come to see me. Emily stepped out of the car, her face a mixture of shame and regret. Dad, she said, her voice thick. I'm so sorry. She explained that the day after I spoke to Michael, he'd called them both. He had told them everything. He had finally told them the truth about their behavior. They had been so wrapped up in their own lives, their own dramas, that they had been blind to their father's pain. They had come to offer a reconciliation. I looked at Emily. Then at David. Then at little Lily, who was hiding behind her mother's leg, peeking up at me with curious eyes. The anger that had once lived in my heart was gone. It had been replaced by something else. A calm understanding. I had been on a journey, a long and painful journey, and I had arrived at a destination I hadn't anticipated. The destination wasn't revenge. It was forgiveness. I looked at Emily and shook my head. There's nothing to forgive, honey. I was angry. I was hurt. I built that library because I was drowning and I needed to learn how to swim. And I did. I knelt down to look at Lily. And who is this? I asked, my voice softening. Lily came out from behind her mother, holding a book. It was from my library. It was a beautifully illustrated book about a little bird who learned to sing again. I love your library, Grandpa, she said. Her voice was as sweet as honey, and it melted the last bit of ice around my heart. Grandpa, I whispered to myself. The word tasted like salvation. I took their hands and led them into my house. It was the first time they had been there in years. They saw the empty spaces where Sarah's things used to be, but they also saw the stacks of books in my study, the notes I had written, the purpose I had found. We had dinner together. It was a simple meal, but it was full of laughter and stories. Michael called halfway through. He was on his way. He was driving from the city. They were all coming home. I looked around the table. My children. My granddaughter. The silence of the last few years was finally broken. But I wasn't the same man. The revenge I had taken wasn't against them. It was against the silence. Against the indifference. I had taken the poison of bitterness and had turned it into something sweet, something that nourished not just me, but my community. I had built a library. But what I had really built was a bridge. A bridge back to myself. I learned that forgiveness doesn't happen overnight. It happens when you let go of the idea that you were wronged and start focusing on the idea that you have a right to be happy, no matter what. It happens when you realize that the greatest revenge you can take on someone who has hurt you is to succeed, to thrive, and to find joy in spite of them. And you know what? I did. Now, As the narrator sitting in my armchair, looking back at this chapter of my life, I realized that the story of the forgotten birthday gift was never a tragedy. It was a lesson. It was a lesson in resilience. It was a story of a man who looked into the void and didn't blink. He looked into the abyss of loneliness and rejection, and he built a library. The stars outside my window are shining, and my house is full of laughter once more. But the quiet moments are no longer my enemy. They are my sanctuary. They are the moments where I can reflect on how far I've come. The peace I feel is not an accident. It was earned. The point isn't to be loved by everyone. The point is to be a source of love. And that's a legacy that will outlive any act of revenge, any party, any forgotten birthday. It's a legacy that I built, one book at a time, and it's the only victory that truly matters. So, if you take anything from this story, let it be this: the greatest act of defiance against a world that has forgotten you, is to love yourself enough to create a world where you are needed. The library stands in the square, a silent monument to my transformation. The children still read there. The old folks still find comfort there. And I still put books in it. My heart, once broken, is now open wider than it ever was. And that is a victory I will cherish for the rest of my life. I'm not a bitter old man. I'm a grateful one. I learned that your value doesn't come from the people around you, but from the kindness you leave behind. And I have left my mark. It's a small, wooden box on a post. But inside it are stories of love, resilience, and second chances. And that's enough. That's more than enough.